I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I just want to start off tonight. I'll just quickly run down the agenda, but first I want to recognize all the folks who came out. Tonight I know it was a little awkward with our invitations going out to people who as part of our regular meeting, Kiwanis wanted to reach out to a lot of folks who work in the town and that have did a great job over the last week or so trying to get us back to a normal state. We have Chief Robinson here, and we have Matt McDonough, and we have John Hall, and Tom Reynolds from the DPW. We have a state representative here, Jim Campbell, and we have our state senator, Bob Headland. We had some of my friends here from NSTAR who are here, especially Herbie. Herbie was our ambassador. It's the ambassador program we ran for. We have some of the hardest hit areas. We put a program together, and Rob Billett and Doug Foley. Rob is our director of station operations, which was busy here with the substations in town, which all got back to normal at some point. They had a lot of damage, and Doug's our vice president of operations, electric operations, and I have my friend Paul the Best, who's the supervisor on Tilden Road, also Mark's here resident, and Mark Foster and Matty Gillespie from Hyde Park who were running around in T-Rock Lane through the trees and the snow and whatnot. And they were helping here. We had some other folks from the DPW that we really liked it. Tom's team, they worked together, and the police and fire did a fantastic job. I was talking with Chief Robinson, who told me how many calls he had to do, not only during the event, but then post-event. Everybody in this town did such a super job pulling together. So I've been talking with my good friend Jack, and we said, we'd like to see if we could do something real quick during one of our meetings to just pull together an agenda that talked about what's involved in emergency preparedness and how hard people work to kind of keep our town as great as it is. So we'd had probably would like to have a couple hundred people here, but we have about 40 or so, and we thank everybody for showing up. Brief agenda. Jack's going to get up and say a couple of words, even though John Valea said he couldn't. John, I overruled you. And Herbie has a slide deck and kind of wanted to share his experience of running around the town. I know I saw him on Tuesday and Wednesday in town, putting some of the wells back up and the pumping stations and running around removing some wires. He was running around with Tom's crew. Was pretty impressive. So Herbie did a little slide deck. Jack also did a little slide deck that he kind of wanted to show everybody. Tom Reynolds was going to come up. You want to say a couple of words as well, and then I think Matt, you're going to say a couple of words, and Jim Campbell. So we'll try to make it as quick as possible. But next on the agenda I have is Jack. All right.
First and foremost, I don't have to drink right now, my expression. I just wanted to express to all the people that were involved in the Storm Nemo, everything that was done. I happen to live on the water. I happen to probably have a lot of damage in my house, but I will say this much, that I could not believe the way the town came together, all the departments came together, and it could have been a lot worse. In 1978, my particular house was flooded 8 feet of water in the cellar. In 1991, my house, one of my rooms was blown across the street. This year, we lost a little fencing, we lost an AC, and within, I would say, I think it was about 5 days, our electric was back on. And I was walking down the street meeting some of the people that were restoring the electric. DPW was down cleaning everything out. And I gotta tell you, it's a miracle. The way everything happened was unreal. And I gotta just say thank you. Thank you to the town, thank you to DPW, thank you to Jimmy for all the Facebooking, thank you to the National Guard, thank you to Kevin, thank you to everybody, and that's what I just wanted to say, thank you.
Riders on the storm, riders on the storm, into this house we're born, into this world we're thrown, like a dog without a bone, and we're out alone, riders on the storm. There's a killer on the road, his brain is squirming like a toad. Take a little holiday, let your children play. If you give this man a ride, sweet
last thing I'd like to add is that my personal thing that happened to me was that living on the ocean, this was my first major storm on the ocean, although I'm old enough to remember '78 from the city and everything else. But it was with the help of one person in this room, Andy Cushman, who came down to my house, provided me with pumps, who was there at 10 o'clock a.m. on Saturday when the water was coming over the wall with non-resistance. And I just wanted to say thank you, Andy. And to add to that, Andy was out there doing all the tree work in town, and if anybody has trees now, please see A. Cushman, professional trees.
The ambassador to the town of Marshfield from NSTAR, and he is a supervisor in station operations and skilled not only in operations but in customer service. So I have the pleasure to introduce Kirby.
Kirby.
Thank you. Good evening, Kiwanis membership. General Stella, Honorable Jim Cantwell, Honorable Senator Bob Edlund, and distinguished company people from NSTAR who gave me a lot of support during this storm. I also want to recognize the Board of Selectmen who work behind the scenes to make sure that I'm doing my job properly. Thank you for taking the time from your busy schedules to meet with me tonight. I appreciate the recognition, and I'm honored to be invited to this meeting. As one of the many NSTAR persons in the town who helped coordinate the restoration in the blizzard of 2013 and its aftermath, I must say it was quite an adventure. My adventure began Saturday morning in the town of Sharon. I visited the fire chief and asked him where I could help out, and he said there's just one street that had a large tree down on it. I said, just one street? It was amazing. So I went over there, cut the trees up, had the town come in and bulldoze them out of the way, and we were all set. I thought I was done for the day. Little did I know, about 15 minutes after I finished, it was about 10 o'clock in the morning, my boss called me and said, Marshfield, Marshfield. I said, okay. So on my way down to Marshfield, I took a few pictures that I wanted to share with you. This was Route 95 on a Saturday morning. Where are the shoppers? You know, wow, empty. Interchange is empty. It was a sight to be seen. Never experienced such a thing. A major interchange, not a car around. Okay. Sorry. I'll move the bell over here before I lose my toes. Okay. My first stop was at the Department of Public Works in Marshfield. I was quickly introduced to Tom Reynolds, Brian Bartlett, Mike Moran, and Nick Halliner. They welcomed me and supported me throughout the 5-day ordeal. We worked together like we were brothers, like we knew each other for years. We had 16 NSTAR crews assigned to us. That was close to 50 individuals. And the town's Public Works Department divided them up. We went to different areas in the town to restore. Many of the streets I couldn't even pick off the names. All the signs were plastered with snow. It was difficult. So they sort of chaperoned us around, and there was basically 50 streets that were blocked in this town. When I heard that they had a list of 50 streets, I said, this is the record of all records. In my 40 years working for a utility, I never experienced such damage to an electric system and to a community. Maybe the Great Barrington tornado had a localized area, but this was so widespread. Anyways, before we get going and do any work, we have to put on our hats, put on our gloves, and safety is number one in the company. I wanted to make sure all 60 of those men went home to their families. That was the #1 priority for our company. And all lines had to be tested with amp probes. This device tests to make sure there's no amperage in the electric system. And where would it come when the system is so broken down? How could we get shocked? Well, you have dozens and dozens of people running generators in this town, and they're backfeeding into our system. We were working on the lines and we were getting sparks. Our system was down dead, but we were getting sparks from all those generators. So we have to be careful. It takes time to restore safely. Okay. We had lost the town's water supply. That was the #1 priority. We sent 7 tree trimming trucks up to the water supply pump stations, and we found dozens of trees that had crashed through the electric system. So we assigned line trucks and tree crews, and that was brought back on this second day in the evening. We re-energized those stations. And that was a priority because the fire department needs water. So, I was also introduced to Lieutenant Paul Tabor of the Emergency Management Office. Wow. When I walked in there, I said, wow, this town has an emergency management office. They got it together. And the chief, Phil Taveras, was there. They both were my confidants. They advised me. We talked about elderly and how to keep them from freezing, because we knew that the lights were going to be out for 2 or 3 days. There was an assisted living complex that if we put generators in, we could save a lot of people, a lot of, should I say, stress. Well, elderly people can't really live in another area. They like their homes. And we were able to, through Steve Driscoll, I called him, I said, Stevie, I need your help on this. We got to bring generators from Boston and keep this housing project going. And Stephen went to bat for me. He worked with Doug Foley, our VP, and they somehow maneuvered 2 generators, 2 large generators, over to that complex, and they were kept from getting cold, and we didn't hear a peep out of the people, so they were very happy. We also were worried about the sewage treatment plant. We didn't want stuff floating all over the place without the pumps going, so we set up a generator over there. You know what happened on that cruise ship, so I'm not going to get into that. You got to keep the town safe. Okay. Okay, and I just wanted people to know that on the second day, there was a diesel fuel shortage in the area. Even the town's tank was running low. So I told Lieutenant Tabor that if he has any contacts in the state, could they help us out? The next day, I was told, show up at the town tank and we'll fuel your trucks. 5,000 gallons of fuel came from the governor's office to help the town out. Unheard of, you know, to help us out. I had to send trucks all the way to Plainville one day to get fuel. There was no fuel in Rainham, Taunton area. They had to go all the way out there. 2 stations. One station, you should know the difficulties. One station says, we're not taking your credit cards for fuel. They turned them all away. So they went down the street to another station at Citgo, and they accepted it. We were also asked by our Boston dispatchers to look out for 6 families in town. Those people had elderly that were on life support systems. I never knew that NSTAR takes an interest in that, but they did. And I had to go house to house. And in one home on Mount Farm Way, we hooked up a generator for a 92-year-old person who was a veteran, and we just didn't want him to be uncomfortable. I have some pictures. And remember, we're navigating through hard-packed snow streets, slippery. We're putting chains on the trucks. We're taking chains off the trucks. I had chains on my boots that were so slippery that we shouldn't fall down. And again, #1 safety thing in the company. We want the employees to come home safely. So all these little things all these safety procedures take some time. We get through it. The first day before the tree crews came, an N-Star truck was assigned to me, and we had a medical emergency. A person had a heart condition. So the linemen volunteered to do the tree work so the ambulance could get in the street. They were great. Town crews worked side by side with me. Their association with us and cooperation was outstanding. This is a neighborhood up on Montana Street. It was devastated up there. We had to replace New England Telephone or Verizon replaced 7 poles, but every one of those small narrow streets had trees. They were entrapped up there. We spent 2 full days with 7 tree crews untangling the mess that was up in that area. Before we went into the area, again, we had to be safe. We had to turn the power off. I found a lot of live wires down, and I didn't want the tree crews to be shocked. And to work safely, we had to turn the power off. So some people said, I had power the whole storm. Now what are you doing to us? I said, we have to work safe. Some of the dangerous trees that if you don't have a good eye, you're driving right under 2,000 pounds of wood. You know, they could crash down and crush your car. So we had to be careful up here. Just to see, some of the streets were narrowed down, tree debris, telephone lines, cables everywhere. It was difficult. Here's poles that just broke off from their top, wind shear, trees crashing down the lines. Route 3A was a total disaster. A few miles of primary just pummeled. Essex and Waltham Street, houses crushed by trees. We helped. The trees were in the streets. They took our lines down, but we also helped the homeowners. They were buried in there. Roofs crushed. I had one lady crying to me that all her meat was spoiled. I said, well, just take a ride around the corner and you'll see $60,000 worth of damage on a house. So please, if you're starving, come with me, I'll feed you. This is up in your water tank area. Trees were down in that area. Once we opened that up, I was able to do some line repair, and we brought back off of Cohasset Street, a whole neighborhood. I think it's called Eagle Street up there. The town worked closely on this. In many areas, we kept a monitor with the lines being down so that the children wouldn't go near the lines. We kept a person there around the clock watching until we could get there and clear. And here's the town. Once we cleared the lines, the town came right in and cleared the trees out and opened the streets up. Simple house wires that were crushed became impossible to get at. Just tons and tons of wood, crushing them. We had to cut through them to restore the power. And the beach, I was amazed at all the rocks the ocean throws at you. Amazing.
Thank you for having us. And first and foremost, I want to start off by thanking the Kiwanis for all the service that you provide to the entire town of Marshfield. One of the quickest, fastest growing groups that I've seen in Marshfield since I've been a resident. You've served us in so many different ways. My first time dealing with Kiwanis was when we came to you seeking funds for the playground. And your answer was how much and what do you need and when can we get it done? So you step up in every way to every organization that comes to you. And one of the responsibilities we have on the Board of Selectmen is to approve gifts that are given to the town. And it's quite frequently that we see the Kiwanis name come across our desks. So thank you so much for the work you do. And we can applaud that. I really deeply appreciate you having this meeting tonight and getting a recap of what went on during the storm. We had a selectmen's meeting on the Monday night after the storm hit on the weekend. Somehow we had power in town hall, things were working great, we had video, and we had our state representative there, we had our fire chief, our police chief, we had even town council showed up wearing a suit, even though it was a casual night. So everybody was there, everybody was prepared, we had a great meeting, it was so informative. And then after the meeting was over, we found out we had no audio. So essentially 5 of us talked about what a great job the town did and how we had no loss of life and how does you set benchmarks in a storm of this magnitude, and the fact that there were no serious injuries reported, no loss of life, and that within a week we were back to normal in the town of Marshfield, but nobody got to hear it. So I really do appreciate you having this meeting tonight so people get to hear all the efforts that were put into recovering from Blizzard Nemo. Now, John and I have worked together for 3 years now, and we signed so many papers. Trish Riley knows there's hundreds and hundreds of papers that come before the Board of Selectmen, but the one that we take most seriously is the one that says that we're declaring a state of emergency for the town of Marshfield. And this was the longest state of emergency that this town has had in many decades, and it lasted 6 days. John's going to give us a recap of some of the numbers of what occurred with our fire and police. And during that 6-day period of time, I can tell you that it is with the greatest confidence that we sign that paper. And that's because we're handing over the governance of our town to our Emergency Operations Center, which is led by Lieutenant Paul Taylor. And you've heard his name a couple times tonight. Everybody here knows him, but for folks at home who may not know him, he's the person who takes the reins in the town of Marshfield. He runs us from the Emergency Operations Center. He makes sure that everything is coordinated through that office. Fire, police, all the services within NSTAR and our utilities, anything that needs to be done to make sure that we preserve life and try to help people get through an emergency like that. Lieutenant Tabor's there. It comes to the point in a storm like this, an emergency aftermath situation, that sometimes we have to tell him to go to sleep. He's up for several days straight working with all of his staff. So we deeply appreciate all the work that our police, fire, DPW, the National Guard, the way they stepped up. My goodness. We had probably 24 National Guardsmen with all of their vehicles. Jim is going to tell me the real number. What's the
40 in Marshfield.
40 in Marshfield alone. And I'd like to have the vehicles that they brought to our town were instrumental in making sure that not only could we evacuate people from their homes when they were stranded, but they also helped us when we had a very difficult decision to make with respect to not having enough space potentially for housing people at our shelter. Our first plan was to use the Council on Aging, and we had a great shelter plan set up, but you know, you make your best laid plans and then you make your adjustments as soon as the emergency occurs. So we had to make a decision to shift over to the Furnace Brook Middle School, and it was the National Guard that made that transition as smooth as it possibly could be. We ended up having as many as 160 people in our shelter during the course of several days while recovering from the storm. And Jim and I were there Friday night, and the Red Cross came and helped us out as well. And I think we stayed till about 11:30 at night waiting for the cots and the blankets to show up to try to comfort people and to see them through the storm. And although people were upset about being displaced and being cold initially, the next day there was a sense of camaraderie in the building. It was almost like people from different parts of town and different walks of life, different ages, different backgrounds. They all had something in common. And it was almost like walking through like a small village, talking to people. There were people playing games, there were people with children watching TV shows. Everybody had 3 square meals during the day, and it was really a great symbol for how well everything came together as we dealt with this storm. So I'd like to hand it over to my colleague and friend John Hall, and he wants to relate some of the numbers.
Thank you. I'd like to take this opportunity publicly to also thank the Kiwanis. Over the years, they've been great to me. Christmas dinners I put on for the homeless shelter, the Kiwanis were right there, going back when Jay and I would, I'd come to the meetings and Jay would introduce me at those meetings. So they're really a great asset to the town. And while we're here talking about the storm, I'd like to thank Tom Reynolds from the DPW department. Chief of Police, who, I'm sorry, Fire Department. The And I see Kevin Filer here from the police department, one of the hardest working police officers. And also our state rep, Jim Cantwell. He really went all out to help us out this storm, getting the fuel and so forth. And we have a general there, General Sullivan, I believe it is. And I knew Matt was going to be watching the kids tonight, so I took the liberty of getting a few facts and figures about some of the responses of the EOC. And during the Marshfield state of emergency, all emergency and storm-related calls are channeled through the Emergency Operations Center, headed by Lieutenant Paul Table, with representatives from the Fire Department, Police Department, DPW, and many volunteers. I think Ann was one of those volunteers. When you were a volunteer at the EOC, and Trish, yep, a lot of people stepped up with the storm. The Marshfield state of emergency lasted 1 hour short of 6 days. And in that time, over 2,500 calls were taken of the EOC. They were 605 police-related calls for action, 200 fire-related calls for action, 900 other storm-related calls for action, and there were 800 other calls for information inquiries. There were also 40 National Guard personnel during the 6 days, reporting 112 missions. And primarily they were evacuation and tree cutting. There were 400 folks who came to the 2 shelters, Senior and Furnace Brook, for food and heat. And 150 folks took refuge and slept at the shelters. During the storm, there were 41 house strikes. I believe, is that what it was, Chief? 41 house strikes from trees?
Yeah. That's a fair number.
And to see how the town all pulled together, it was really gratifying to know that we have these guys out there when emergencies come. So thank you very much, DPW Fire Department. Thank you for recognizing these great folks.
Absolutely. And one last thing for folks who have not reported damage to their property, if you're watching this at home, call 781-837-7100. We're trying to compile as much information we can about the storm damage so that we can have a report that essentially will help us out in getting a presidential declaration of an emergency area, declaration of a disaster area, so that we can be eligible to receive funds to recover from the storm. So please, 781-837-7100. Thank you.
Thank you both John and Matt for those kind words and the update. And Jim, you want to come up and say a couple of words?
By the way, the gentleman and I were talking about saying what a vibrant group Kiwanis is and the tremendous work that's done here. So I want to thank Steve and Jack and all of the Kiwanis members. I'm very proud to be a member of myself. But by the way, some lessons that we're taking away from the storm. We had Jack talking about one storm, Jack, when you had 6 feet of water coming to your home in your neighborhood. Second storm that you said when you had a whole wall blown in. So one of the lessons tonight is don't live near Jack Griffin. The quick things we wanted to relate. First of all, this was an historic storm. We're from WATD, because Bob Gold's here. We heard Rob Gilman saying it was the 5th most snowfall that we had in the history of our state, at least for things that were recorded. 5-foot storm surges, Bob, you and I were talking about. Waves over 30 feet high carry over your house when you would evacuate, but waves coming over your home. This was a major, major problem, as we all know. So for people watching, when people were calling us saying, you know, when's the power coming back, they said this has been the toughest storm, the most damage. The work that you guys did for Men's was incredible. And we want to be here. That's one of the purposes tonight to say thank you. My quick additional purpose to be here, one is to make sure that people know from behind the scenes. Herbie, wonderful job, as you were explaining, because we were at the EOC, and Bob was calling down as we were comparing notes here. And one of the earliest things at the EOC, when it was being run, Trish Riley was there, and Colin, because they were the 2 lieutenants behind all the work that Paul Tabor was doing. We had a call that morning on Saturday, and they said, Jim, we're overrun. We have so many tremendous needs. What can you and Bob do to help? So we made a call to this gentleman here, General Sellers. And the amazing part, Trish, you probably remember, is that you had to come get me. I said, he called and said, I'll be there in an hour. The general showed up with over 40 National Guardsmen, who immediately went to work helping for recovery, getting people out of their homes. General cutting back trees, because we did, Herbie, have those 50 trees that were cut back. But just for the NSTAR people to know, we're at the EOC, and all this great work to be done, and we said, who's here from NSTAR? And Herbie was there. And I have to tell you, Herbie, stand there for a second again. The guy who looks like the professor, you would think he had Harvard. And he said, I'm the guy. Herbie, you were incredible. The work that you did over those 5 days. Thank you so very much for your professionalism. But I have to say, General Tom Sellers, General Greg Smith, they showed up. General, I relayed to you, but I want to make sure people know, because Kevin Robinson was here, the fire chief, as well as Phil Tavares. We had at our shelter at one point 160 people, and we, by the way, something we're going to talk about when we debrief, we had 2 people dropped off from the hospital who were dropped off. Matt, you and I were there when they dropped off some patients. One patient who was suffering from Alzheimer's dropped at our shelter. in general, I told you this, but I want to make sure we're going to do an accommodation. Sean Higgins was there. This woman was walking around, and the poor woman didn't know where she was. She was so distressed. One of your National Guardsmen stayed with her for 45 minutes, walked her around, sat and talked to her, put her at rest. She was able to sleep because of the great work of the Guard. So thank you so very much. For my closing things, Steve Driscoll, I want to make sure you come up and there's a photo. Steve Driscoll, one of the things we've never seen done here in Marshfield, but you setting up that command center that we knew when we were trying to find out how we're going to get people back. Bob and I were getting many calls saying, when's that power coming back? You're being there directing people like Paul DeBest, who Paul was out at 11:30 at night one night as Paul was showing the work. Steve, thank you for all that tremendous work. Yourself over and over again. Bob, I don't know if you wanted to add, but the things that we talked about together when we brought the governor to town, first of all, thanks to the governor by putting that emergency call out saying that no one can be traveling. That was really controversial. He took a lot of heat by telling people not to be on the road, but Phil DeVaris, Kevin Robinson, and others said that was absolutely the right decision. It saved lives, it saved a lot of people, it saved a lot of trouble for emergency personnel. And by the way, when he showed up, the deal was those 50,000 gallons of fuel that we got, or 5,000, right? 5,000 gallons of fuel. Yeah, we want more. We're getting 45,000 more. That was because of people like General Sellers. So, General, thank you so very much for coming.
Thank you, Jim. I'll just offer a couple of quick observations. I have the honor of representing 8 coastal communities, so we obviously suffered a lot of damage in various parts of the district. So, Friday night, I got a little head start on shoveling. Saturday, I went out, did some more shoveling. Didn't know what to expect around the district. I had a conversation, I think, on Saturday. Well, I actually talked to a couple of volunteers that were working in your emergency response center throughout the day, and later in the day I talked to Jim. And forget about worrying about living next to Jack Griffin. What you should worry about is getting a phone call from Bob Hedlund, because as I was talking to Jim, he says, oh, my lights are flickering. Wait, my lights are... Oh, my power just went out.
He knocked it out
while I was talking to him. So I said, well, gee, I haven't lost any power up here in Weymouth. What's going on down there? So didn't really realize the extent of damage down here, other than getting some of the reports from some of the folks I was talking to down here. And I think on Saturday, I was working with some of my Hull officials who gave the all clear sign, I think 1 in the afternoon, on some of the equipment that was in Hull, which we got moved down here to Marshfield. And appreciate the Guards' attention to that. But it wasn't until I got down here on Monday, and I didn't know what to expect, because quite frankly, it was probably the worst plowing job. Tom Reynolds and I were talking about this earlier. Worst plowing job I've ever seen in Weymouth, or any place in my entire life. So I figured it was real bad everywhere else. So I get to Marshfield, and the streets are plowed, which we didn't have in Weymouth. I had power, but I didn't have any plowed streets. But in Marshfield, the streets were well plowed, but I was blown away by the amount of damage and the amount of trees down, the amount of lines down. Still on Monday, when we came down to visit the shelters with the governor's appearance. Probably the most important and poignant thing I heard from Jim Cantwell in a long time, when I was talking to him on the phone. I said, you know, what should I be doing? What else can I be doing to help down there? I don't want to get in the way. Well, actually, before I said that, Jim said, at what point are we as politicians in the way from the professionals getting what they need to get done? But I have to tell you, in talking to some of you folks, not only volunteers, but Paul Tabor, incredible job down here. The DPW, your police, everybody involved in making things work during that state of emergency. And I can contrast it to the other towns that I do represent. You had your act together down here. And one note about NSTAR, you guys have been a whipping boy, I know, in recent years. And any politician, and there are none in this room, but any politician that grandstanded and beat you guys up this time around, it's shameful to do that, because the response from you guys and in other parts of my district, National Grid, the preparation and the response was excellent. I know a couple hiccups here and there about communication, but overall, I think a lot of lessons have been learned in recent years from some of the other storms. And it's easy for me to say, not having lost any power where I live. Jim wondered how that happens. I pulled a few strings. I've got this direct line that comes from Quebec right down to my house.
Underground.
Yeah, underground. Yeah. But seriously, the response was great, and I know, and I told people in you know, the rest of my district that asked me about some of the damage. We had seawall breaches in Hull. We had major collapses of a couple of roadways in Hull because of the seawall breach. but the amount of lines down here, just my personal observation, was unbelievable. And I think, Jack, you showed a picture of Wyoming Street, or one of those streets. I was actually down here a little bit early before the governor's visit. I had a little time to kill, and I saw a Fox 25 truck go by. I had my 3-year-old kid with me. I was multitasking that day, and I said, let's kill some time. Let's see where that truck's going. And that's the neighborhood they went to. And I took pictures because I'd never seen anything like that. And I certainly was old enough to have lived through the blizzard of '78 and remember much about that. But the response, given what you had to contend with, was great. So congratulations, and thanks for the Kiwanis for putting this together.
I'd like to just add my compliments to everyone else as well, and thanks. Over the course of my military career, and particularly my time in the National Guard, on and off for the last 37 years, I've probably been in all 351 cities and towns in the Commonwealth in some type of emergency capacity. And I will tell you that it is significantly different when you walk into a community like Marshfield, where people were here to help one another, and the spirit of cooperation that occurred in that EOC and outside of the EOC was just tremendous. Not every community can do that. So it's compliments to both the representative and senator, but the selectmen, the entire team that supported the effort. As I was driving down, we as Jim mentioned, talked to him about an hour earlier. I was probably the other car on 128 at the time, we were coming down from Newburyport, because we were in Newburyport the night and early morning prior to, and we were coming down here. And as we got just about that Route 3 split going into Boston, you could see the change. You know, and I'm convinced that all the plows then went to Boston. As the road conditions started to get a little bit worse. But I think I mentioned to Jim, I said, nobody plows you on the South Shore. I mean, thank God I stopped at Randolph, that's where I lived, so I was good. But as we moved down into from Situate to transition into Marshfield, as the senator mentioned, completely different environment. You get hammered pretty significantly here. But I will tell you, the spirit of cooperation that we observed when we came into the EOC and everywhere else in town was tremendous. And I appreciate the way in which you received the soldiers that came into the community. It doesn't happen everywhere. You know, there are sometimes we get there, what is perceived 5 minutes late, and we never catch up. And there are times that we get there through some help from people like Jim getting to us early, that we get there on time, and it makes all the difference in the world in soldiers when they're on the ground here operating with people. And you'll see it in their attitude and their whole professionalism, how they go about the business. So on their behalf, let me just say thank you for everything that the town of Marshfield did, and finally, thanks to the Kiwanis for putting on a great evening.
Thank you, General. Tom Reynolds for the DPW.
Thank you. I don't mean to take up any more time, but I just want to thank everybody for the team effort. NSTAR, I couldn't ask for more from Herbie and NSTAR. I have a special place in my heart for NSTAR because my parents met while working for the Boston Edison, so I have a little connection there. But the team effort, fire, police, National Guard, NSTAR, tree crews, I can't say enough. It was a fantastic effort. I had a crew from, line crews from Georgia. I had 2 tree crews on Saturday morning from the Berkshires, and then I had a couple others that came from Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio. So it was a great effort. I can't say enough I'm proud to be involved in this project with this team, and I'm proud to say that I work for this town, and I look forward to being here for a while, and I thank everyone for that.
That covers it for our informational session on the storm, but we do have another, Tricia wanted to come up and wanted to speak. So we had an agenda item, Tricia Riley.
Thank you. Andy Pollard and I were manning the phone, so if someone called the emergency number for the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, we're the ones who answered the phone. And under the direction of Lieutenant Tabor, we handle a lot of requests, and one of the things we had to do is go down the line of what they call the Medical Reserve Corps to try and get volunteers to work at the shelter. So what I'm here and what I'm asking you people to do, if possible, is we have brochures that are provided. There's a medical reserve corps. It's a group of volunteers. They train. It's minimal training, and they're on a list to call for something like emergencies like this, and they'll go to the shelter. And it's always important to have people with some sort of medical background available at the shelter. So if you know any nurses, if you know any EMTs, if you know any paramedics, if you yourself have some sort of medical background and you're interested in volunteering at the shelter, or at a shelter, or during some sort of a disaster like this town and this area faced recently, I ask you to take one of these brochures, which I left on the table, along with a volunteer form. If you know someone who might be interested, then I urge you to do so. And it's just to have a bank of volunteers available for times like this. And the good thing is, it's one of those things that you can say no. I'm sorry, I can't this weekend, I've got the kids. Or I'm sorry, I can't, I'm in Aruba. But if you can and you want to, maybe you need to get away from the kids. In your local, we can send someone to get you to help at, for an emergency like this. So I just ask you to consider that. If you know anyone who might be interested, just take it home and let them consider it. So thank you.
One last item was just an update on, I know we put some information on our website and on Facebook about the Kiwanis, when we sent the email out with sharing some information about the amount of damage that was happening, and the membership stepped up to offer some time. People at any special situations in town, particularly senior citizens or others, or people might be faced with hard times in addition to the damages that might have occurred during the storm. We have had a few folks respond to that. That come to the channels, and a few of the folks I know have offered, Jay and Eric and Dana and Jack. I'm still trying to figure out what Jack's going to do. But I know what Jack and Eric and Dana can do, and Jerry and all the other folks. But you're welcome. And Andy also is offered his chipper. And I mean, when we first sent the email out, it was amazing. It's one of the greatest things about being part of this club was how quickly the emails come back from all of you. Some with reply all. We'll keep that subject to ourselves. But how quickly everybody offered, and that's the beauty of being in the club. That's why I like being part of this club, and I'm glad that I joined it, and I'm a member of it. And I thank everybody for offering that. And I'm sure we have a few situations we have, and there may be others that come out. But I just want to thank the membership for that. And thanks for listening tonight, and thanks for all the invited guests. And with that, I'm going to close out the meeting. If Kevin, you wouldn't mind leading us.
Bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains, through the prairies, to the ocean, like the foam, God